Hello and welcome again to this edition of Phi TV. I'm your host, Brad Swanson. We are coming to you from the Goodwood Plantation in Tallahassee, Florida. We're here at the 35th annual dinner for the James Madison Institute. We are joined by the keynote speaker, amazing American, former Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Brad.
We are also joined by our good friend, Bob McClure, President and CEO of the James Madison Institute.
Thanks for having us, Brad.
Hey, our pleasure. All right, we're going to jump right in. So, Secretary, you have been famous for education advocacy on all levels. What made you so passionate about that subject?
Well, first of all, I'm a mom and now a grandmother, and when my children were young, my husband and I were very interested in finding the right fit for their education. We knew we could afford to do whatever we wanted and felt was right for them. In the process of discovering where to have our children go to school, I came across a little Christian school in the heart of our city, Grand Rapids, Michigan, called the Potter's House, and got involved there as a volunteer. Our children didn't go to school there, but got involved, and the more I got involved, the more I realized that there were families who wanted to have their kids in a school like that, but couldn't because they couldn't afford it, and the school couldn't afford to raise all the funds necessary for their tuition. Long story short, that began the advocacy for policy change. And it turned into a full-blown advocacy when we realized not too long after that the only way we're going to change it is through political efforts to actually change public policy.
Well, everybody knows in Florida, for sure at least, that the DeVos name is famous for being engaged. So grateful that you're in on this area of education. Bob, COVID really revealed so much about education policy that we weren't even aware of, and a lot of what people would argue were draconian measures taken by school boards, against basically the Constitution. So Tell us where JMI is on, or where you were on what happened during COVID, and what are you doing now?
Well, I think to your point, I think COVID revealed even the greater need for more school choice, more parental choice, and accountability in schools. The great discussion over left and right and woke or non-woke, all of that can kind of be washed away if we allow parents to choose the school that best fits the needs of their children. And then they can choose what's best for them. And we don't have to argue over politics when it comes to these kinds of issues. And so what we saw was during COVID, and even though Florida remained open, though the governor kept our economy and our schools open, what we saw was that there was even a greater need for school choice. And also, not just the traditional forms of school choice, but like micro schools popping up everywhere, and more forms of creative homeschooling. What you find when you have school choice is that you have entrepreneurs, moms, lots of times, who become entrepreneurs about doing what's best for their children, and not just in middle-class neighborhoods, but in underserved communities and all across the state. And it really is a critical issue for the future of that generation.
Yeah, Secretary DeVos, you were literally on the front lines. I mean, while we were here in Florida having a much different experience than states across the nation, you were literally on the front lines seeing these. And as the Secretary of Education, you jumped right in. Tell us about your experience being in that office when these sorts of, insanities were happening across the country.
Well, of course, it was heartbreaking to see kids kept out of school for as long as they were in so many places. But it's not the role of the federal government to mandate opening, closing, any kind of policy. It really is the state and local districts' responsibility. But we kept urging them to look at the facts and figure out ways to serve students, keep students in the center of everything. And we had lots of opportunity to point out where it was happening to a great extent pretty well, and lots of places where it wasn't happening. And COVID was sort of the turning point as families saw firsthand what was going on in their children's schools, or not going on, frankly. It really was the turning point for so many parents who previously had not thought about the importance of having choices and options.
Yeah. What was amazing is that, like as you said, that kind of highlighted what was going on, but then that then cast the lens a little deeper into curriculums. As all these parents suddenly got involved strictly on the COVID reason, they dug in. And Bob, when you talk about charter schools, the advocacy that JMI is doing in education, talk to us about where you've been and where are you going with it?
Sure. We were laughing about this. 20 years ago, school choice or homeschooling was kind of considered a fringe issue. Governor Jeb Bush becomes governor. pushes the first kind of parental choice bill, gets struck down by a very left-wing Supreme Court here in Florida, and yet the governor, to his credit, continued to push. You're going to hear more tonight about these movement conservatives all across the state of Florida who've been fighting this fight for a generation, and so this didn't happen overnight. And if it happened overnight, it took 20 years to be an overnight success. And yet Florida has become the leader in this arena for so long. And yet, and while we see places like Arizona and Iowa as of the last couple of days try to take the crown from Florida, Florida's up for the challenge. And so we're really excited. We have more young people participating in some form of school choice than any other state in the country. We have more students across the board doing it, more programs, but now we need to take that final step and get universal ESAs. And that would kind of complete a kind of a 25-year march towards educational freedom for parents.
A lot of work still to do. Secretary DeVos, let's kind of close out with you, and then Bob, I'll give you the last word. I should give you the last word, but we're going to get there. So during that COVID time, I mentioned those other issues that were coming up, CRT and all these other agenda-driven, they'd like to call them curriculum, but we know it's really, they're trying to drive a narrative into our children's minds. What did you see, and what do you see happening as far as the trend now that all these great parents are involved?
Well, what we saw was the system, led by the school unions and the bosses there, overplaying their hand at every single step. And that really did help to reveal what was going on and the agenda-driven, motivation that so many of them have. I see going forward that parents are not going to go back to just thinking everything is fine at their kids' schools. They're going to continue to be engaged. They're going to continue to request and require their opportunities to have a say, and whether that is to keep them in the school that they're assigned to or to find something else that works better for them. They're going to keep demanding this, and if there's a silver lining to the pandemic, it's that the failings of the system that were there long before COVID happened became revealed to every single family, every single American, really, frankly.
Thank goodness, and now we're on the march to hopefully rectify a ton of that. Bob, I'm going to give you the final word because this is JMI's 35th. Yeah. How do people get engaged on issues like education? How do people get engaged with James Madison?
Well, folks are going to hear tonight, JMI is in the ideas business, and one area where we focus is certainly in education, educational freedom, but we do a lot of things in the healthcare space, in election integrity, in the tax and regulatory space. And so, we have 22 million people in the state, 1,000 people moving here a day, 2 different time zones. It's the greatest state in the country to run a think tank, to be in the ideas business, right? And then we have leadership both in the House and the Senate and a governor all of whom are willing to embrace those kinds of ideas. So I would encourage folks to visit jamesmadison.org. As you referenced, and thank you for doing so, we're celebrating our 35th anniversary tonight. So JMI's been around a long time through the good and the bad, but we really see here in Florida, in the free state of Florida, that great times, even greater times are ahead. And so I would just encourage folks to visit jamesmadison.org.
I love it. Well, I'm sure they will. Secretary DeVos, thank you so much for all the work that you've done, the leadership that you've shown over your life, the leadership of your family in the state of Florida, and even though you're in Grand Rapids, we know you guys have a huge footprint here. Bob, thanks for everything that you do, and thanks for coming on Phi TV. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Brad.
That's all the time we have for this episode of Phi TV. Make sure you hit us up on our social media feeds for more great interviews like this one. And for now, thanks for tuning in.